Hey everybody. All right, welcome back. We are doing a part two of chapter 5, The Myth of Secularism. It was just, there's just too much to hold into that first episode, so we had to do a second part of that. And we're going to be going over the third part of the chapter, dealing more in regards to politics and kind of, I guess, where that vacuum of secularism is filled with. So if Rob, if you could kind of touch on that and lead us in.
Yeah, so last time we talked about how um, the secular worldview leads to a drive towards utopia, I should say, an intensified drive towards utopia, where they sort of need utopia right now so that they can so they can ward off the all the complaints that would come from the nihilist direction. Um, and this is sort of a parallel. It's a separate issue, but it sort of compounds with that, which is that the highest, like if you just look at the world and you put yourself in the mindset of someone who's secular, or maybe you believe in secularism, there really isn't something higher that you can conceive of than working to govern large scale human interaction. You can make sort of a case for the independent inventor science track, but a few people will be attracted to that, totally fulfilled by that. That's great. But for the most part, that's not, even if that was a lot of people, there's only a few people who make the biggest contributions. So that's a really narrow field with high competition at the top. So what you're left with is what really makes a difference in the world and in the large groups of people's lives is governance, is putting in place laws and trying to direct the development of people and the world as a whole through social governance. So that becomes sort of the pinnacle of all achievement and the highest thing to strive for. You know, you sort of have, like Harari's view, you have, well, if you're not interested in globalism, then you must be a nihilist because you just must not care about anything. Because clearly, if you cared about something, the most important thing to care about would be being the ones in charge and making things are on track according to our plan of things. So this what this does is it sets up politics to be the highest virtue and the thing to be strived after the most. And that I think bleeds right into everything becoming politicized, like we're seeing nowadays. Douglas Murray does a great job covering it in his book, The Madness of Crowds. But, you can't just sit down and enjoy a sports game anymore. Politics is injected from the outside. And if you complain about it, then people remind you that everything you do is a political act, including watching sports. And if you're watching sports, not thinking of it as a political act, then you are participating in whatever cultural suppression. So it really just makes everything suck a lot more because everything becomes political and politics becomes the be all end all of everything.
So what would you say is the way out of that? I mean, if let's say we want to put our blinders on and say, okay, well, even though a good majority of the population is wanting to inject politics into things that typically politics shouldn't or wouldn't be injected into, is there a way to kind of circumvent that? Or I mean, I guess an example would be growing up, I remember my dad would never want to go watch a movie that had a specific actor in it that pertained to a certain political ideology.
Right.
So, then the actor has incorporated politics into his sphere, and then I guess puts that out in the movie. So how I guess, is there a way to then kind of cut that out, or do you think that that's just kind of going against the tide?
Well, it's definitely difficult. It's definitely going against the tide to some degree. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, to some degree, there are. are an enormous amount of people who go about their everyday lives and aren't crazy political and don't think that everything you do is a political act and are just normal people. Um, but they are unheard from the most part, and we hear from people who are insisting the opposite. And so, in some ways, I mean, especially if you, again, if you're a secularist trying to combat this feature of secularism, there's really not much to turn to because your argument is, well, just don't worry about it too much. Okay, well, if it's the most important thing in the world, I should probably worry about it, you know? So it really, I think the only cure for it is to displace it as the most important thing in the world and to be able to look at politics, not say that it's unimportant, because it's certainly important um, to hmm, it certainly has a significant impact on our lives, on other people's lives, and therefore, because our lives are meaningful and significant, politics does have a place, does have an importance. But if you believe in higher realities, higher virtues, then it becomes much easier to, even if you're pissed off about politics, to just sigh and be like, okay, that's annoying, but I'm, more invested over here. So I'm going to go do this thing. I guess it just occurred to me that, the best approach for the secularist trying to combat this idea is sort of focusing on the reality of individual accountability and the reality of your effects in the world, because it apparently it's not obvious, but I think it's pretty obvious that when you just shout at people and try to get them to do what you want them to do, it doesn't really work that well. So, like, if you actually want to be as effective as possible on the political side of things, you actually have to govern yourself. You actually have to have um, well-regulated interpersonal interactions. You have to be able to look at the way you handled something and be like, ah, man, I let my anger get the better of myself there. Or, sorry about that. I'm trying to not do that. So you can kind of get there with just the emphasis of the more that we have good individuals who believe in the pursuit of truth. I mean, already there you've transcended secularism, actually, because what is truth? But anyhow, uh, you can take that just veneer of pursuit of truth and whatnot and say, actually, the most effective way to do this is to interact in a tolerant, less exasperated manner, and to do the work of steel manning the other side, listening to the other side, trying to reach across boundaries, all that sort of stuff. So there's some ability to make that argument from a secular point of view, but I don't think it has as much weight as one might hope. And people, again, and then you're fighting against, like, okay, maybe that's a great rational argument, but the issue is now you're fighting against people whose religion is politics, and they're not as interested in your rational argument. They're interested in the fact that the highest meaning of their life is, riding on environmental protection or queer rights or whatever horse they've chosen, or multiple horses that they're backing, getting that through and getting as much momentum behind it within their own life, so that they can see the results, so that they can feel fulfilled in their actions. That becomes superordinate and will it's a lot harder to displace that with just the rational hope that things will work out for the best if we all calm down a little bit and try to interact more pleasantly with each other.
Do you feel like politics has always been this dogmatic? Do you feel like maybe that's a result of, I guess, more of a collective acceptance of secularism? Because it seems like now, I guess, going back to the last point of, okay, maybe, maybe Alec Baldwin or maybe like Matt Damon might hold a democratic or a liberal point of view. But see, now we're getting into the point where entire companies and corporations are backing a specific political ideology. And then in many instances, these political ideologies that a lot of these companies are backing might even be looked at as not being political to begin with, but has been then brought into the political fray. So I think what we're seeing now is people have an inability to engage in critical thinking and proper, an actual dialogue with one another. It's more of an echo chamber. And you can see that. I'll bring up, for example, YouTube. There are many points of views that you can't harbor on YouTube. So instead of people just saying, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm just silenced now, they kind of built parallel along with YouTube. Now you have Rumble.
Mhm.
So I think that's just what a lot of people are doing, and that's good because voices need to be heard. But I guess the dangerous byproduct of that is you're just only going to go then to the institutions that share your political views and your ideologies. So then people
Right.
become more dogmatic. And would you say that a lot of this kind of holds on to the, I guess, the foundation of uh um secularism? Do you think that that's a result of that?
Yeah, so I think that there have definitely always been people who that was sort of true for, who there's always been a certain population of people who politics is sort of the be all end all. But I definitely think that we're experiencing a unique flare in history. Is it the worst that it's ever been in terms of that? I mean, it's not the worst it's ever been in the world overall, but in terms of that specific instance of so many people finding nothing else but the pursuit of politics, I can't really say if it's the worst, but it's definitely uh, been increasing, and I think everybody can tell. So uh, well, on that point, so this is a difference, another difference between Pinker and Harari, which shows the instability and the non-cohesiveness of secularism. So uh, Pinker says political ideology undermines reason and science. Just straightforward political ideology gets in the way of science and reason. Okay. And I think that's just incontrovertibly established now. Um, on the other hand, Harari just praises secularism up and down. It's the best thing in the world to him. He says that one of the biggest problems with secularism, this is his quote, the main problem with secularism is it probably sets the ethical bar too high.
Yep, I see
And
that.
I just think that is hilarious. Like the if our highest ethical strivings, if our deepest virtues are politics, like that's the bar. It's too high. Oh, really? And he has this idea that, oh, secular people are just going to have this sort of disassociative, reasoned approach, and they're going to be totally moderate in their promises, and they're going to look at their failings and adjust from them appropriately. It's basically like the idea that everything religious is all the bad and stupid stuff that has held us back. And now secularism again is that utopia, is that everyone does something right. And it's just nonsense. I mean, he says at one point that uh, political promises within the secular realm are notoriously modest, and I'm just like, what world are you looking at? Where do you find the moderate political promises? Like what? has anyone heard a moderate political promise like in the last 50 years? Like, oh, cancel all debts, free
Right.
school and healthcare for everybody, including illegal immigrants, open borders, and whatever, no abortion for anyone, or no all taxes theft. It's just like I don't see moderate proposals going on and being the mainstay of political interaction. Like that, I don't know what world he's living in to make such nonsensical claims such as that. And then again, Pinker's promoting secularism, but he himself is very straightforward and seems to be aware of reality that political ideology undermines reason and science. So, and Douglas Murray points this out and talks about the way that more specifically goes about where it does become your highest value, and then you get so distressed as it's not coming about or people getting in the way. And he says that a secular society which imbues politics with the highest meaning, he says, this is his quote, politics becomes laced with a passion, including rage, that perverts the whole enterprise. So he and Pinker are very well aware of this and upfront, hey, this stuff gets in the way. I don't know what planet Harari is living on, but yeah, I mean it definitely, you know, is not help. It's exasperated by secularism and the more spread of the secular ideals within society and the discount of anything higher. Then yeah, we just see more of that passion. We see more of that, um, you know, desperate pursuit where, if something's the most important thing to you and you're pursuing it desperately, that doesn't equate to that Harari view of just being moderate and reasonably assessing your own faults and working with compromise where appropriate and agreeing to disagree and whatnot. Just that is not what follows one from the other.
So we're essentially saying that this man Harari, who describes human beings as poorly equipped, dim-witted, and deluded beings with no natural rights, who doesn't believe that there's any meaning in anything, is attributing more meaning to politics than he is to religion, right?
Right, right. And when he says he looks towards this secular world of perfectly reasoned individuals, he says, we're going to enter into an open-ended quest for truth and compassion. Like, wow, that sounds great, cool. But he himself multiple times declares the meaninglessness of all stories, um, humans as ill-equipped for reason and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, okay, but a quest is a human story.
Right.
So either quests are meaningful and we should pursue them, or they're not. Like you
Yeah.
can't have both. You can't say all human stories are nonsense. Forget about all religion. It's all nonsense. Oh, by the way, here's a quest for you.
Yeah. To go on. Yeah.
Right. It's like that you're offering a purpose based on a story. You either believe in that sort of stuff or you don't. So
You're
again,
not
it
going to go
shows.
on a quest. You're not going to go on a quest unless you find meaning in it either, right?
Right, exactly. Exactly. So there's this fundamental contradiction in that sort of secular worldview. But again, as we said last time, you can't avoid contradiction in trying to enact a nihilist point of view. So
That's why I think like it almost feels like a big troll, like almost because it's like every angle that is being come come at with trying to deride meaning and trying to or calling something as being meaningless. When we're going through the introduction and what we talked about the last time, anyone that's in the grips of nihilism uh, is in despair, right? They don't have meaning to life. Therefore, they're not going to necessarily go on a quest. They're not going to try to attain anything or achieve anything. But then you have all of these trendy quote unquote, philosophers and humanitarians and that bring forth the idea of nihilism, but they themselves seem to have an agenda, seem to be on a quest. They seem to be
Right.
trying to attain something and to achieve something,
Right. They're on
um,
a quest to change people's minds, you
change
know?
people's minds, you know. So I want to add this is I thought this would be a good combination here of quotes. You say politics in any society is doomed to be the lowest on the hierarchy of virtue, the first to fall into corruption and the last to move into integrity, because politics selects its participants from those motivated by power and rewards them with more power. You then follow it up by saying, yet secularism sees no higher realities to aspire to than politics and governance of peoples. So that first quote I thought was really important because it does seem that those that are hungry for power, that are on big ego trips or want to push their specific agenda, not necessarily come to a common ground with anyone, but wants to enforce their ideology. Those are the ones that typically seek for power and hold office. Then I think we do get some actual reason here when you say that secularism sees no higher realities to aspire to than politics and governance of people. So if we are under the assumption, we know that, okay, politics is kind of a dirty cesspool, it's just kind of,
Yeah.
why would anyone go there? And then you have secularists who see that there's nothing higher than that.
Right.
When I look at religion, when I look at politics, I mean, of course, you can look at organized various aspects of organized religion and say, like, okay, this was definitely a human driven desire or aspiration that used then politics, or that used religion as a vessel to then push their ideology, more so than with politics, because I think religion is a little more, I guess, set foundationally. I mean, of course, with politics, you have the Constitution, you have other articles that are kind of, I guess, the foundations. With religion, you have the Bible, you have the Bhagavad Gita, you have the Quran. But I think that politics is easier to manipulate. It's more flimsy, right? It's more versatile. It changes. I guess that's also because there are multiple parties, but it seems, I guess, kind of you're shooting yourself in the foot if you were to call politics the highest reality to aspire to, if it's so flimsy and so easily corruptible.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say I think there's two things going on there. One that you're pointing to of um, that unless you believe politics is the highest realm, in which case you're sort of a materialist, even if, whatever that person pre-existed official materialism or whatnot. Essentially, it's the belief that there's no higher truth other than the reality of humans bumping into each other as material objects.
Right.
Um, and then if you have religion, in theory, at least, that admits for, um, let's go and say eternal truths. Maybe you would talk about a middle ground of just deeper truths. But, if you're a secularist, you can look at religion and just say, well, that's nonsense. People are just lying to themselves. There's no such thing as eternal truth. Okay, fine. But even still, the people who are lying to themselves or being lied to, they still believe the lie, or at least some of them do. Like I don't think you can honestly look at religious belief around the world and come to the conclusion that people do not actually believe this. So that means that the people in those traditions who are um, following the belief in eternal truths are going to have more of that stability. Now, you can say whether it's going in the right direction or not is an issue for sure. I mean, I'm trying to avoid the because you can play the no true Scotsman game with anything. You can say, oh, well, people who are truly religious would never be so fanatical and violent, or people who are truly secular would be rational, and it's only the non-true secularists who are whatever. Like that gets us nowhere. The reality is we live in a world of difficult people. A lot of them let's say all of us making stupid decisions at times, some people more wrapped up in stuff than others, blah, blah, blah. It's messy, it's complicated. So, but just looking at the facts on the ground, if politics is the highest thing, then it is the highest thing. Then there's nothing to govern above that, right? Truth in that sense, even though secularists will say that they believe in truth, if you really adhere to the secularist ideology, it's pretty easy to say, well, you know, yeah, truth's great, but since politics is kind of the highest thing, the governance of peoples is the highest thing. Once we figured out what that should be and what that should look like, if there's some truths that get in the way, we should probably bend them or avoid them so that we can get to our, ideal political state. Whereas when you actually believe that truth is something foundational, superordinate, and eternal, then your politics has to bend to that rather than the truth bending to your politics. So that's one aspect. That's sort of the argument that you were talking about for more of a stable foundation, at least in religion, even if you don't like the direction or whatever. Um, the other part that I'm pointing out there in the book is that politics selects for people who are more corruptible. And I think that is an inevitable scenario. So just to make it more explicit, like, again, I think this is something that everybody recognizes. It's really difficult to deal with people. I don't mean that as a misanthropic statement. It's just people are not all amenable to the way you want to do things, and we all want to do things the way we think they should be done. And some people are really adamant and they really get in the way and they really mess things up and they destroy what could have been a great thing. And some people are so convinced that they know what a great thing is that they'll just trot over anyone to get their great thing accomplished, and so much more and so much in between. So what that means is in a political career, you are dealing with people and trying to represent people, trying to govern people necessarily, right? That's what it means. Okay. So your task is a difficult one, a frustrating one. You have to deal with people's nonsense all the time. They criticize you in ways that just don't make sense. They get a lot of praise. They might even vote you out of office for complete farcical accusations or just totally fallacious arguments. People might still stand up and be like, yeah, lock her up or lock him up, even if it's a total non sequitur. That's super frustrating. Here we're imagining that this politician is totally rational and on the ball, but obviously uh, there's variation there as well. But again, that just adds to the difficulty. So you're in a very difficult position dealing with difficult people and you're getting frustrated and all this stuff. Okay. So you have to choose whether this is worth it or not. And part of what makes anything worth it is the rewards that you get out of it, right? It might be really annoying for me to, till the ground in the spring, or wait to plant my seedlings after the last frost. And I don't know, but it's a worthwhile endeavor because then I get fruits in the late summer and fall. Okay. So the thing that you're rewarded with in politics is power over people. That's the reward. That's what it is. I mean, aside from money, which, obviously that's part of it, but if you're playing a straight game, other professions are much more monetarily rewarding. So again, if we're talking about politicians making a ton of money, that just goes right into the corruption camp anyhow. So that's what we're talking about already. But the main reward is being the person who makes the decision, being that person in power, being granted power over other people. Okay. So the people who are most motivated by power are going to be the ones who stay in the process the longest. The people who are least motivated by power are going to be like, this is not worth it. Like, these people are annoying. This is all lies. I'm getting slandered for no reason. There's no one standing up for me. or if there are, it's not making a dent. Okay, I'm just done with this because I don't care that much. I don't want to be in power. I don't, power doesn't do it for me. So I'm going to go do my own thing. Okay. So now, so you have a selection mechanism that filters out people who are um, less motivated by power and selects for the people who are more motivated by power. Well, the people who end up in office and are inherently more motivated by power, therefore are more corruptible by the promise of more power. So you're selecting for the people who are going to be most corrupted in the position that they end up in because they're the most motivated by power. So I just think this holds true across any time and place. Like the people who want power, and this is an old adage, the people who want power are the least to be trusted with it. And the best person to have in power is someone who doesn't want power. The issue is we don't live in a state where, you know, God comes down and appoints our righteous king, or, whatever approximation of that it might be. We live in a state where people voluntarily compete for political office, and that means that the people most motivated, the people who will stick it out the longest, will be the most corrupted. That is in no way is a pitch for a monarchy or a that we need to go find the lady of the lake to chuck a sword at us to make us king. Um, the I'm just saying the system that we have comes with that price, and if we understand that, like you said, politics is a cesspool. Politics is full of the worst kind of people. It selects for those people. So then that couples with the fact that now in secularism, politics is also the highest virtue and value. And then I think that is what really highlights this quote that I put in here. It's from the Psalms. It's Psalm 12:8. The wicked walk on every side when the vilest men are exalted.
Mhm.
So I think
That's
that's
something
where we are and where we're headed.
I agree, and it's like we set up a straw man almost in terms of politics. Like I think of like, okay, hypothetically speaking, let's just say that we're in a constitutional republic. We we're we use democracy as a tool to get people in and out of office that we vote for, that we want in and out. Now let's say there's a group of people that want complete and utter control over a population. Well, one of the best ways to do that then would be to convince the population that God is not the highest form of virtue, that living a spiritual life isn't the highest form of being virtuous, that it's actually this man-made uh role, this something else that's manipulatable, that's corruptible. And so if you can say, hey, that's the real virtue, but they won't tell you that they're the ones that will guarantee who's in and out of that. So they're the ones controlling who, is that top level of virtue. And I think that's where the real danger lies, because it sounds fine, I guess, when we're in a free society, right? Well, hey, I mean, don't you want your politics to be to be of the highest virtue? And yes, absolutely you do, but that's not the be all end all. And I think that, once you start looking at communism or totalitarian regimes and you say like, okay, well, if you were to live in a society full of secularists that think that, that office is the highest form of virtue, but it's upheld by somebody who has an iron fist on the people and does complete atrocities, then I think you're doomed for destruction. It's only when we're in a free society that we have, I guess, the allowance to mess around with ideas like secularism, where there isn't something higher that man can't tamper with. And I would say that you're right. We are heading into some dangerous times, because if if the politicians and those with the power can convince the population that it's not God that has uh, the authority, that it's actually the government, and then you get rid of men that will uphold the fact that God has the authority, and fill it with people that are willing to open up and say, you know what, no, it's the government that has the highest authority. Uh, we're into some really dangerous territory, and I think that's where we're headed. That's unfortunately where we're headed. Uh, and I'll say this as a last point on that. We always hear in during the election cycle, oh, this is the most important election. Oh, this is the most important election. With the way technology is advancing exponentially, the way that humans now have the ability to survey and control populations, this very well may be one of, if not the most important election. And I don't even say for the United States. I mean, I'll say worldwide, considering that how much influence the United States has on the rest of the world. If if that if the freedom isn't held here, it's gone. That dam is broken. You know,
Yeah.
and whether or not this occurs with a bang, like if something happens and things get kinetic, or a whimper, things are kind of swept under the rug, and now we have a coup, something happens, and now what are you going to do? Um, so I would say that having a secularist worldview is actually a detriment to a healthy society.
Yeah, it goes back to something that we talked about in one of the earlier episodes where the the phrase from the Bible that says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." And I'm just stealing this from a particular theologian, but there weren't atheists around at the time that that was said. And so that meant was the fool believes that there's no judgment.
Mhm.
Um, so that I think is the issue that we're talking about, where the secular idea where the government is the highest, again, that's just straightforwardly saying there's not a superordinate judge.
Right.
There's not an incorruptible realm where justice ultimately has its backstop and will be upheld no matter what happens here.
But
So, good.
yeah, that brings me up to this an additional point, I guess, which hasn't I don't know if a lot of people have touched on it. But if let's say the government instills some sort of an AI judicial system, or something along those lines, would that still be considered secularism? Because then you have the people in power. You can say, like, okay, this artificial intelligence now that governs the people in our stead, we're doing a cognitive offload onto this AI that's now going to be doing the work for us. Um, do you think that there's kind of some I guess some issues with that, where you're not only replacing God as being the highest, and you're not having, I guess, individual humans as the highest, but you're then instituting a programmed software to kind of make all the decisions for you. And then so people start looking at that as being, okay, well, this AI is incorruptible, it's the highest form of virtue, therefore that's what we're going with.
So, the idea that we're talking about here is, what is secularism? So, from the idea of that people forward is like, oh, it's just anything that's not religious, right? Then you could say that the sort of insert the AI thing is not secular, but then, yeah, you can evaluate, are they treating it as a god? So I think the point to come back to is that the idea here is, this is the myth of secularism. I'm saying that because I don't think secularism exists. I don't think it's operable. So, we do have this state where we have agreed for some time to essentially um, not constantly proselytize each other, and to not be pushy about religion, and sort of agreements along that side, and that you could call secularism, sort of an open space in general, milieu of cities and whatnot, where we aren't conflicting over religion. Um, and I think that that's good to some degree, but the idea of secularism as a governing system is nonsense because, as we looked at in part one, it's an incoherent system. And then, as we were just talking about, as it functions, it elevates the lowest level of human accomplishment to the highest value. So it it's not, you know, to ask the question, would this future thing be secularism? Well, people might call it secularism, but secularism doesn't really have a good meaning in itself. It's either, if someone's fully committed to it, then that means they're just a nihilist. It means they don't believe that that religion is anything or it shouldn't exist. If they are just sort of uh whatever, culturally involved in it, where they're like, I mean, we just shouldn't be annoying about our religions. That's not really a belief set. That's just what would you call it? Like like a set of manners, a societal uh, agreement. And you can get to that agreement from a multiple number of core belief systems. You can get to it from nihilism of like, yeah, shut those religious people up. You can get to it from religion where you're like, hey, I don't think that we should have a um, one religion state because that would give the religious authorities too much power. So we can't treat every interaction as an extension of our own church or whatever. So I just don't think that there is such thing as secularism. There is a belief uh, in human freedom. There's a belief in uh, economic goals. There are cultural manners that we have. And those sort of together add up to what we now call secularism. But the issue is and this is how we introduce it. We've just sort of agreed to not talk about metaphysics, but it turns out that we need to talk about metaphysics because now there's issues on the metaphysical level that we need to sort out. And then I was thinking about, I think it's Voltaire who says something like, I don't want to believe in God, but I hope that my king does. I forget who he says, someone in authority. It's like king or judge or whatever. But basically, his point is, I can't commit myself to belief, but I do hope that people in authority don't feel like they're the top authority. So this was hundreds of years ago, but I think that's sort of the inevitable mindset of a rational secularist is like, you know, uh, again, the rational secularists themselves won't necessarily say it, but they believe in eternal truth. They believe in the superordinate value of truth. The problem is their own value set and the things that they propagate does not actually defend and support that claim. So while they're promoting this materialist science, truth liking culture, they're actually forwarding a bunch of philosophical precepts that undermine the real commitment to the truth. And so when you end up with people who are not just sort of naturally inclined to be truth seekers and see the scientific endeavor in itself as some sort of uh, uniquely fulfilling drive and purpose, then they're going to be put two and two together and say, yes, everyone's been lying and all human stories are just made up nonsense and our rights only exist in stories that we tell each other. So human beings don't actually have natural rights. And there's a bunch of people who are just annoying nihilists who are getting in the way of the global government. So now let's make a plan based on those precepts. And that goes very badly. So then you apply it to the AI issue, and it's just the same thing down a different road. And I think there's something to be said about the new role that AI might play. And if we're looking at it and, objectively, we might see people treating it with what you could call worship, devoting their life decisions to it, deferring to it. So yeah, that would, transcend the secular mindset if you recognize it as a religion. But I think all in all, the important thing is not to keep going from where we are, but to turn back and say, hold on, what is going on in our metaphysical territory? What are these basic stories that we have that determine our mindsets? And which ones do we need to hold to have society hold together?
Yeah, I would say it it appears to me that those that hold what they would believe to be a secularist ideology or belief system are then those that have not anchored to anything greater than themselves. And so they're grasping for the straws. They're saying, okay, well, we'll put the government in there because the government is then that representation of the highest form of virtue in humanity for humanity. And so those that are attaining or trying to achieve that level of control in politics, those that are power hungry, are banking on people to hold that level of idea of belief system to say, okay, if we're saying that politics is the highest form of virtue, then that guy that just got in that is power hungry, then he's the guy or she's the woman. It's almost like I try to I think of it like, if you put somebody in a cage, the secularist who's been told, hey, look, there's nothing outside of this cage. What you see in the cage, that is all that is in existence because that's all that you can perceive. So your reality is within the cage. And so then they're less likely to think, well, hey, wait a minute. Well, what's outside the cage? If you're more of a religious oriented person or you believe in God, it is almost impossible for you not to think there's got to be something outside. What am I not seeing? What's outside of this cage?
Right.
But if you're doing that, if you're engaging in that level of thinking, it's throwing the whole ship out of whack because then those that are banking on you to have that secularist belief system uh, are hoping that you're not going to be asking those questions. So it behooves them to hope and ensure that more people have that belief system to where they're not starting to think outside the box. Is that kind of along the lines there?
Yeah, yeah, that would definitely be a natural strategy to come up with and take is, if you're trying to propagate whatever system it is that you've decided needs to be propagated, the people who are going to be the most annoying about standing in your way are going to be the ones with different foundational principles that they believe in to such a point that they would, you know, bother themselves with standing up and opposing you and you know even destroy their lives in order to oppose you. So it's obviously then much easier to deal with people who are just kind of like, I mean, I don't know. Someone else probably knows better. It's never going to be that great. Uh, those people seem nice on TV.
I mean, I guess if they tell me to put a mask on before I go in the building, I gotta put the mask on, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
That
well that ties right into the other side of it, that so there's a passivity that's obviously helpful, but it's also helpful if people are charged up into an emotional fervor, be it through fear or anger or what have you. So if you're terrified about droplets coming and flying at you, um, or the MAGA people coming and you know uh, whatever they might do, coming and being very stupid around you and saying stupid things and making you you know feel bad that your country's so stupid, and then you don't feel like a smart person among smart people, and that's sort of the end of the world because whatever
something.
whatever other fears might be come up with, and then if you're on top of that, you think that I mean, you could say on the other end, people are coming for your guns or people are coming for your wombs or uh there's someone out there who's coming to just enslave the Jews or enslave the gays or uh, destroy all white people or whatever it is. Like the more flamboyant the rhetoric helps to obviously just gin up uncritical votes for whatever side.
Right.
Um, so obviously the more you employ that, the more that the system that benefits from lack of deep questioning and independent thought benefits.
Yeah. Well, crazy, like we said earlier, crazy times. We're under the assumption that we're, at the peak level of human evolution because we have all of our little gadgets and we have, climate controlled facilities and we can, hit turn a lever and fresh water comes out. But I think more and more people are susceptible to bonkers ideologies today than I think we have in a while. So it's just a crazy world we're in. But
Yeah.
we're trying to help out. We're trying to get people back on the right track with the book Purpose Inform. This book is available on Amazon. If you go to Amazon.com, type in Purpose Inform Rob B. Davis, it should pop up. Unfortunately, it won't pop up if you just type in Purpose Inform. So please add in Rob's name in there as well. We'll go ahead and add a link to it in the description below, as well as a link to Rob's personal website, which has a list of all of his books, as well as the description of who he is and what he's going with. Um, Rob, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we close this
Yeah,
episode?
on that note and on the note of this conversation, I have a post on that website called A Political Mantra, and it's a list of 14 or 15 points that I think we can all agree on, that we all have to agree on. And so it is a hopefully something that would help people sort of cohere and return to a more uh, reasonable relations within politics if we just sort of keep these things in mind. So people might find that useful, and that might, I know we say some things on here that might be more favorable, more liked by one side than the other, but nothing in the book is a trajectory for, you know, either political extremism. It's about getting to the foundational truths. It's about getting to the core things of life. So not about venturing off into one specific proselytizing for one specific side or point of view or whatnot. And I think the same thing's true with that post. I really try to write for a reasonable middle ground. That doesn't mean compromise on everything. That doesn't mean not hold the line when you need to hold the line on important values. But I think people might like that post as well if they've enjoyed this conversation.
That's the way to really to get people's attention though too, right? Is to come at it from uh a more grounded middle level as opposed to then just taking one side and then you're just already shutting out 50% of the people out of the gate.
Right.
Uh, so I think we should close out. Is there a quote, Rob, that you had that you wanted to close out with?
Yeah, let's do the one from Young, the beginning, page 107.
Okay. So did you want to go ahead and take it?
Sure. The decisive question for man is he related to something infinite or not? And that's Carl Jung from Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. So
And that
same foundational question we've been talking about throughout the book. You got to deal with infinity, and it ties into the Tolstoy quote we read before. But decisive question for man is he related to something infinite or not?
that is the decisive question and one that we are tackling as we go through this book. And
Yep.
I think I'm hoping that viewers have an understanding of or an idea of where we're coming from in our and on the side that we stand with that question. Um, next week, so we're taking a week off, and then next week we're jumping into part 2 of the book, Return to Truth and a Solid Foundation for Life, which then begins with chapter 6, Purpose and Form. And so, Rob, as we get deeper into the book here, now we're going to start opening up. So, this first part, we were kind of refuting some belief sets that were kind of catering more towards a definite uh, way of thinking. Now we're getting into the reason why an infinite way of thinking is actually the truth.
Yes, and that infinity needs to be accounted for in your thinking.
Yeah.
Not just infinite chaos, but an ordered and principled of infinity.
There is order within infinity. Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below, and we will get to them for the next episode. Other than that, Rob, I hope you have a great rest of your day. And everyone watching, God bless, and may peace be with you.